Alright, so I decided to bust the Ryzen 3600 out of the closet, and this thing kicks ass. So let's talk about the overclock on it. Right now it's running Y-Cruncher 4.4 gigahertz with a 1900 F-clock. Yeah, it's just, this thing is sweet. It's just, not every 3600 is going to do this. But yeah, right now it'll do Cinebench at like 70 or so Celsius, and it'll max out Prime 95. Well, that's the thing. If I have the side panel on, then it goes, it gets about 91, and at that point, it's stable. But you can imagine if you fired up Furmark or something, it's just gonna go to 95 instantaneously. Because the problem with this system is I have it in basically a less than optimal 2006 office case. It looks like it's like a steel box. It's got an 80 millimeter exhaust fan and the power supply exhaust fan. Pretty much, and I got a RX 580 in there, so it's pretty much an oven, because that thing will put out like 200 watts on the GPU. Which at that point it'll start throwing Windows hardware errors, which I found out the hard way. But luckily I used this technique where I go to hardware info and I right click on this and go to alert settings. You should do this too, because you can click this if it's greater than 1 and it'll pop up a window if a hardware error gets thrown. So the last one that got thrown for me was last night, so I came back to the computer and it was on the screen for me, so I didn't have to, what if I forgot? I might not have looked at it and wouldn't have seen the shit. So yeah, it was like last night. And the reason for these, I've determined, is when the IMC gets too hot, because it'll happen when the CPU gets hot, super hot, like during Prime 95 plus like a GPU load, and it won't trigger anything in the stress tests. And I struggled for a while to find out what it was, because I couldn't replicate it. I didn't know if it was the memory, I didn't know if it was the GPU doing some crazy something, until I pretty much determined it'll happen relatively constantly at above 92 Celsius, and it's always a hardware 19 error, and it's always on what it calls core 0, but I knew that core 0 was fine. So yeah, anyway, 4.4 all day, no problem. Right now the side panel's off though, because the case is pretty much, you could find something in a dumpster and build a case that's better than what it's in right now. Yeah, it's pretty sweet. It's running Y-Cruncher and it hasn't topped 80 degrees yet. And it'll do Cinebench, just like, it'll eat it for breakfast pretty much. It'll do this and not even top like mid 70s. So we'll let that run. And we got 1900 on the F-clock. This is actually, the memory on this is nothing special. It's some budget 3000 cl16 Micron Rev E. It's pretty much some 8 gigabit Micron Rev E. Basic, cheap, like at the time it was like $70 or $80, maybe. Like, I forgot the prices. Like, things have changed over the years, but I got this memory like 3 years ago too. And yeah, it's 3000 cl16. I got it overclocked to 3800 cl16, which is pretty expected if you know anything about Micron Rev E. It scales great with voltage, and I got 1.45 volts crammed into this. These timings, they're not the best. It's not B die, but this is what you get with E die. Rev E dies pretty much. You throw voltage into it, you get a pretty good cast latency and great frequency. So the chip will not do anything above 1900, period. It'll boot, but it'll just spit out You know, it'll just vomit instability. And I know it's not the memory because I've got this memory running at like over 4,000 cl18 on the APU, like, you know, 4133 or whatever the increment is. And yeah, but 1900 is nothing to complain about. So it'll do Cinebench at like 1.27 volts or something. It is prime stable, which is right here. I don't have the live view, but fortunately prime saves your logs in the directory folder. And when I discovered the instability problem, which has now been corrected, by the way, but it was always happening at right when the test would hit the 144K. It was always 144K. It was stable. Anything below that, and once it got there, it's just boom, like it'll throw that Windows error. And I eventually concluded it was the IMC, because the voltages and the VDDP required to keep that thing stable at 1900 probably just hits a hot spot on the IO die. So you pretty much keep it, if you keep the temperature down, this thing is completely solid. It's not even the cores that are the problem. It's like if you throw a GPU load and you don't have optimal airflow, and if you're running it like 95, which is completely synthetic, like nothing Prime 95 and Furmark is absolutely nothing I do will ever reach that. But, I got the side panel off, and even if I do that, it's straight. But anyway, Prime 95 will save a log, and so will test minim 5. So, this thing is stable. I did 3 cycles of the Extreme 1. Anta 777 has a new profile out, and I've been messing with that too. It takes a little bit longer on a 6 core because you're supposed to change the time, the cycle time on it. But yeah, you ought to run something like that for a while once you've overclocked your RAM. You don't want any corruption or anything. But yeah, not every 3600 is going to do 3800 on the Fabric. Even if you bought some RAM that is certified 3800, it's you're not guaranteed that. That is completely out of spec. But so let's talk about the BIOS a little bit. 4.4 on both CCXs. CCX 0 is a little bit weaker. It is just slightly weaker. If you don't give it enough voltage, this core 0 actually is always the first to go, which is not really a problem. A little bit more voltage and I'm still well within the fit limits of this CPU. But for something a little bit more stable, slightly less sketchy, this is, I like running this at 4375 or 4350, because it'll do 4375 at 1.287 volts, like with mad LLC all day, and it'll pretty much hit like 82 degrees in Cinebench. I mean, not Cinebench, Prime 95. Yeah, I forgot if I mentioned, but I got a Noctua U12S on it. It's an old school one, and it does a good job. But the gains between 4375 and 4400, you got to ask yourself, is a few points in Cinebench really worth the extra heat? Because if you have suboptimal airflow like I do in this case, you probably shouldn't run this just for stability's sake. With the side panel off and proper ambient temperatures under control, this is absolutely no problem though, because I got 4.4 running at 1.3125. This thing will run Prime 95 at like 1.23 volts or something crazy. I got mad LLC on it. If you're wondering about the SoC LLC, that's because I could not get the IMC or the Infinity Fabric stable. So I landed at this. I put it at 1.2. and pretty much just adjusted the SoC LLC to get the droop where I wanted it. And this works, so I'm not going to touch it. This is still completely safe. It'll idle at like 1.15 and pretty much sit there. It probably helps the instantaneous hotspots when you're running extreme loads like Prime 95 and FerMark. The transient response that is given by the Mode 8 LLC is going to help out your I/O die a little bit. So I'm not going to touch that right now. These were also kind of a bitch to get, but this works, and I'm not going to fumble with it because the Windows errors were too hard to reproduce, and sometimes they would happen over like after 3 hours, or sometimes they would happen instantly, and this right here works, so I'm not going to touch it. The memory might be able to go down a little bit. I haven't touched that yet. I want to keep tightening the RAM timings a little bit because maybe I can tune this a little bit more, but I'm pretty happy with cl16 at 3800. This thing out of the box will run at 3000 cl16 with trash timings. So, I got 1621, 1939. The TRFC, that's kind of what you'd expect on Rev E. The TWR, I doubt our TRTP can go lower than 8. But if so, then you kind of, maybe I could adjust TWR too. These are as low as they can go. That might be able to go to 5. I don't know if that's actually worth it or not. I'm pretty sure I forgot if I tested that, because I've done a lot of testing on this over the last week, and I've just been, at the end when I was struggling with the 1900 fclk, I was like, man, I'm just going to throw everything at the wall, and yeah, I ended up with this. That, TRTP might be the first one I try to get lower after this, because I'm not touching TRFC. I know that won't go much lower, and with 1.45 on the VDIM, it's with a trash case, it's the memory's probably getting pretty hot. Now granted, there's decent airflow over the actual DIMMs because the Noctua heatsink fan kind of like almost touches them, but anyway, like it's probably roasting, and that's really influenced by heat. This probably won't go lower. I haven't tried it. Probably not too worth it. And yeah, pretty much I got all this disabled because TSMC slightly affects performance. Bank group swap alt on. You can disable that if you're going to be gaming a lot. That does help out with pretty much synthetic workload type things, Cinebench, handbrake, stuff like that. Proc ODT at 30. Now, I might be able to increase this to 32. I think it defaults to 32. But I was hoping that I can lower that and then lower my DRAM voltage a little bit. But that's an important one to tune when you're running RAM at pretty high frequencies. That affects what voltage you can run it at and what frequencies you can hit. These, I don't know how I ended up with that. I think maybe a long time ago when I used the DRAM calculator, it told me to do that. And I pretty much just kept it ever since. But yeah, pretty much, this board is a B550 M Pro VDH Wi-Fi by MSI. It's not the greatest, but it's a good pair for this CPU. The VRMs, they don't even break a sweat. Period. With the 3600, because the thing only draws like 120. I think I've seen it draw 123. And if I really crammed a shitload of voltage into it, I might be able to get one of the CCXs at 4.425. and that's totally not worth it. But anyway, even if I did, the VRMs would be fine on that thing, so I'm not worried about it. Yeah, I think I mentioned that, the 1.2, it's not actually, you don't ever see that. When you have mode 8 LLC, you don't see that. It idles at like 1.15 or something like that. And that's pretty much it on the overclock. Like it's straight. When you run PBO, with you know, the limits lifted like higher than this, like if you raised them to like 130, pretty much 130, if I do that, or just, yeah, there's a motherboard option. If I do that, this thing will run itself into the ground in Prime 95. It'll run like, probably it'll run, I think, 1.3 volts into itself and run at 4 gigahertz until it hits 95 Celsius on Prime 95. It'll just make a beeline straight to critical temperature. And on Cinebench, I forgot the frequencies that it runs at, but it'll run at like 4095 megahertz at 1.335 volts. It'll hit like 75 instantly. So, you know, I messed around with the offset technique, and I don't know what this is. Like I have no idea. You know, the behavior is just indiscernible to me. But I've tried all of these. You know, I've tried the offset with stock voltage. I've tried the offset with various levels of LLC, and they all are either the same as stock performance or way worse. So it is on this good silicon chip, this is absolutely not worth it. You need to, oh shit, let me fix that. Make sure I don't actually set something I forget about. But yeah, if you, on a good silicon chip, it's not worth it to tune the PVO. This is better single core, it's better multi-core than stock. It's cooler, and it's just straight up way faster in any scenario possible. So yeah, that's pretty much it. We are going to let me just change this shit back. I'm going to disable the PBO. I don't know if it actually matters, but just so I don't put this back in the closet, then take it out in a couple years and then wonder what the fuck happened. Yeah, we're going to go back in and we'll run some benchmarks. So I don't know if I showed the Cinebench score, but we'll do that, and we'll do Firestrike and Time Spy. That way we can get a good physics score, and the RX 580, which is a great match, and it's still a good GPU in 2022. Like, it's not bad. This thing will do 1080p. You know, the only problem that I have with it is I'm not a big gamer, and this thing just chugs power. Like, it's just, even if you undervolt it, it's just not that good. Like, I mean, overclocking it will straight pull 190, 210 watts or something crazy out of the wall. And the fan is loud. Like, you know, it's just not the thing for me, but it's a great GPU. And we're gonna load up the overclock. Oh damn. All right, I don't have a profile on this OS, so I'm about to freestyle this real quick. I have no idea what is optimal, so I'm gonna just plug some shit in real quick. Make sure the shit doesn't get too hot. Mainly for the memory on the GPU, because the RX 500 series, the Polaris and the 480 and those series are pretty much memory bound. But fortunately for me, last month I changed the thermal pads on this thing, and that'll keep the memory temperatures down, but it'll let me run mad frequency. I'm not sure if that's actually better than 2199 because it'll hit a different timing strap, but I think it is. Let me just put something in right here. Let's just see if we can do 1430. I have no idea what to put in right here. Probably 1.13. That'll probably pull a shitload of power. No, I want that up. What if it throws an error? You know, it'll be a good way to showcase that little technique I pointed out. I doubt it will, but it'll fuck up the score a little bit. Yeah, this chip's just awesome. The whole system idles at like 62 watts, and that's with C-states enabled. And like shit, like half of that is the damn RX 580, because that thing idles at 30 no matter what power state. If you're in the lowest power state, even if I don't care if you flash the BIOS or whatever, like the power delivery on that thing just draws 30 watts idle. But yeah, this thing is a great chip, and the RAM, I can't complain with the RAM either. But I'm pretty sure that most Rev E Micron chips, you know, if you give them enough voltage, they're gonna do what you want them to. The only thing that's stopping this chip, I feel like, is the temperature. I think if I threw a bigger heatsink on it, I don't know if I could do 4.425. Probably not. It's totally not worth it. But you could do 4.4 at probably a lower voltage. But hell, I even had a Wraith Prism on this, which is a great match for the 3600, because this one will do 4.35 gigahertz with reasonable voltage on the Wraith Prism, although it's loud as hell, and it sounds like a jet turbine taking off at an airport next to your house when you're trying to sleep. But it'll do it, and the Wraith Prism that I have is absolute garbage. Like, if you look at the copper plate on it, you can like stick your fingernail down into the grooves. Like, they're so deep, and I don't know if that's how all of them are, but hell, it can pretty much hold the CPU at around 90 when the CPU's pulling like 115 or so watts, which that's what you get with the Wraith Prism. And I wouldn't really recommend anybody to get a better cooler than something that's rated to cool like 95 or so watts anyway with a 3600. Most 3600, no matter how many volts you put into it, the Infinity Fabric won't hit 1900. The cores might not hit 4.4. But when you have both when you have the SoC at 1.15 and the IO die at 1.1 or whatever I had it at, the heat does stay on the CPU. Like this thing will pull like 123 watts. And if you don't have sufficient airflow, you do need custom cooling for that. I wasn't really paying attention at all during that run, so didn't see any artifacting. I should have been paying more attention, but I have no idea if this is a good score, but I am going to screenshot this and check later. 21,463 on the physics. That's pretty sweet. Time Spy is not really suitable for 3600 and the RX 580, but it's a cool benchmark to look at. The main complaint I have about the motherboard that this is running is the startup time is just, it can vary from so fast you can't get into the BIOS, or it'll just be pretty slow sometimes. And the more devices you have plugged into this thing, I don't know why it takes so long to scan them, but if you have a couple hard drives and like a flash drive, some speakers and stuff plugged in, this thing takes like so damn long to boot up. And it's the only motherboard I've ever had that problem on. Before I put the 3600 in it, I had the CPU in a ASRock B450 Pro 4 Micro ATX, which was a pretty good board. And I don't really, I still have it and it functions, but I'm not, the VRM is pretty decent on that thing. But I figured maybe B550 will help with the memory clock. This thing is more, ASRock's probably not focusing on updating and maintaining the BIOS for the B450, so I figured this is a more modern board, I'll throw it in there. This board also looks way nicer, because that ASRock board is butt ugly. It just looks ugly as hell. It looks like you pulled it out of a Chinese factory, and they didn't even try to cover up the cost of materials they put into it. I'm probably being a little bit hard on them for that, but at least this one looks like a modern motherboard. It's got a good VRM, and it's not any worse than the ASRock board. I'm thinking about using the ASRock board for if I can fix this old Ryzen 3100 that doesn't work. Because I had a 3100 and the CPU was always absolute. It was the worst CPU I've ever touched. It wouldn't even go above 4.1. It's straight up, no matter how many volts you put into it, with the same heatsink, which is a Noctua U12S on a 4-core CPU. No matter how many volts, it wouldn't go above 4.1. It was just an absolute garbage of a CPU. And for some reason now, it doesn't even work. So if I can get it to work, then it's going in that B450 Pro 4, because it's, it doesn't deserve any more than that. That CPU is absolute garbage. So yeah, if you have one of these CPUs, or any Ryzen CPU, but any Ryzen, especially with multiple CCXs and CCDs, go ahead and hit that highest frequency on the memory you can. Get the RAM frequency as high as you can and match your fclk to it. Try to loosen your timings and try to loosen your timings to like 18, 20, 20, 42 or something like that, and throw 1.45 volts, try to get that memory frequency up before you hit that core clock, because that is more important than having 4.4 on the cores. But anyway, there we go, that's the score. Let me screenshot that as well, so I can confirm in the end if this was worth it. That can probably be really tweaked with the GPU settings, because I have no idea what this thing will hit. But yeah, I think I covered everything. This is a good chip. It's, if you have one and if you're happy with it, don't upgrade. Wait till the AM5 socket comes out, and you might be able to grab a used AM5 CPU with a new motherboard and some sweet RAM, and use what you have until then, because this is not bad. Even if it was running at like 4.3, this is still far above what it'll do stock, and it's not that hard to cool. You grab yourself a decent heatsink, and you might have to learn a little bit about what these voltages do, you know, the VDD-G and all that, and your RAM timings, but really, you know, you spend a couple days on it and you can get similar results. So I might do an update with this same system with a tuned RX 580, because I want to mess around with the flashing a different BIOS onto it and modding the timings, because that's where the RX 580 could use some help. And look forward to that new video possibly. So thanks for watching, y'all, and take it easy.